Death by laughter. Zeus. You've probably used or heard the expression dying of laughter. Well, it turns out Zeus, the famous Greek painter in the 5th century, took that figure of speech way too literally. You see, Zeus was good at creating hyper-realistic paintings that made people question if they were looking at art or the real thing. Think of him as the ancient world's Michelangelo, before Michelangelo was even a twinkle in history's eye. His art was so lifelike that, according to legends, birds would try to eat the fruit he painted. So, of course, people came from far and wide to have him paint them. Now, there was this old lady who commissioned Zeus to paint a portrait of her, but make her look like Aphrodite, the Greek goddess of love and beauty. But there was one tiny problem. This lady, bless her heart, was far from the goddess-like ideal she envisioned. She wasn't exactly Aphrodite material, to put it mildly. But hey, Zeus, being a professional, got to work. He painted the elderly woman in all her unique glory. And when he unveiled the portrait, he found the thing so ridiculously absurd, this massive contrast between the woman's request and her actual appearance, that he broke into uncontrollable laughter. To Zeus, the sheer ridiculousness of the situation was just too much. The contrast between the elderly woman's modest appearance and the image of her as Aphrodite was like painting your cat as a lion and expecting people to believe it. The whole thing was so far-fetched that it tickled his sense of humor. We're talking rolling on the floor, peeing your pants, can't catch your breath kind of laughter. The poor guy couldn't just stop, and eventually, his heart literally couldn't take the strain of his own amusement, and he supposedly died in a fit of laughter right then and there. Talk about art that kills, or, in this case, the subject of the art. Molasses flood, Boston, 1919. If you had told the 21 people who died in the Boston molasses flood of 1919 that they'd meet their end drowning in a river of sweetener, they probably would have laughed in your face, and then asked if that sweetener came with pancakes. So, the tragedy started one very chilly day in January while people were just going about their day when all of a sudden there was a loud rumbling sound as if 100 machine guns were firing at the same time, but far from it. Apparently, it was the sound of a 2.3 million gallon tank of molasses rupturing due to the tank's inferior construction and a sudden temperature change. As the massive storage tank bursts open, it unleashes a tsunami of sugary goop onto the streets. We're talking about a 15-foot-high wave of molasses moving at 35 miles per hour like some sort of mutant pancake syrup from a horror movie. This stuff was practically knocking down buildings, lifting a whole train off its tracks. It would have been a funny scene, trying to escape a tsunami of pancake syrup. But people, animals, and buildings got trapped in the goo, struggling like flies in amber, those who couldn't make it out. This freak accident drowned and claimed the lives of 21 people and left 150 people with serious injuries. The cleanup took weeks, and even a decade later, some people say they can still smell the molasses lingering on hot days like some kind of sweet, sticky ghost haunting the city. This disaster literally gave birth to the expression, as slow as molasses in January. Death by beard. Hans Steiniger, 1567. So, chances are you have had a really bad hair day at least once in your life. You know, when you wake up in the morning and it feels like your hair is out to get you, and no matter what you do, you just can't seem to get it to cooperate. Well, one man named Hans Steiniger took the concept of a bad hair day to a whole new level, and unlike you, his hair did get him, literally. Basically, in 1567, in a small Austrian town, Hans Steiniger was the proud owner of a 4.5-foot-long facial masterpiece. He walked around town like he was the king of beards. The thing was so impressive that he would have probably ended up in the Guinness Book of World Records today. Now, as maintenance, Hans would keep his beard neatly rolled up in a leather pouch. However, on this fateful day, he decided to let his full mane feel the breeze, probably feeling like a lion. Well, on his way back from the local store, a fire broke out in a nearby house, and in his rush to help, Hans literally tripped over his own beard, which is entirely possible when your beard is practically the same height as you. Hans tumbled down the stairs of the burning building, breaking his neck in the process. Just like that, the beard that had been his pride and joy literally became his downfall. It's like the ultimate, your greatest strength is also your greatest weakness. But with way more facial hair, and poor Hans died as he lived, wrapped up in his glorious beard. Cursed theater costume. Alan Pinkerton, 1884. So, it's 1884, and Alan Pinkerton, the founder of the Pinkerton Detective Agency, is living his best life. This guy's basically the 19th century version of James Bond, minus the fancy gadgets, but he still made it work. Like, he solved so many cases, saved Abraham Lincoln from assassination once, and was basically every outlaw's worst nightmare. However, he was getting really old, but instead of retiring to a quiet life of fishing and napping in a rocking chair like any normal old guy, Alan decided that he wasn't ready to take the bow. He took a role in a local theater production, and although his new line of work wasn't as exciting as solving crimes and getting shot, it was still something. One fateful day, as Alan was struggling to put on his theater costume, he slipped on the floor and bit his tongue. Now, normally this would be nothing more than an embarrassing moment that you laugh off while drooling for a bit. But Alan wasn't so lucky. The bite was bad enough to make his tongue bleed, and he brushed it off like the tough detective he was. But a few weeks later, the small wound turned into a much bigger problem. His tongue got infected, and, well, it was the 1880s, so the best medical care probably involved a handful of leeches and a doctor crossing his fingers. The infection spread, turning into gangrene, and just like that, the guy who stared down criminals, saved a president, and lived through some wild times was taken out by his own tongue. It's like dying from a paper cut, only more dramatic. Death by parasol. Henry Taylor, 1874. So picture this. It's the evening of August 1874 in London, and esteemed lawyer Henry Taylor is going to the courthouse. The sky suddenly goes full apocalypse mode, clouds turning pitch black and winds gusting so hard it can make a kite blush. While everyone around him is flailing about like cartoon characters caught in a cyclone, Taylor tightens his grip on his hat, determined to power walk his way to legal greatness. Nothing, not even Mother Nature's tantrum, was going to derail his courthouse crusade. Amidst this chaotic windstorm, a woman in front of Taylor is wrestling with her parasol, a high-fashion umbrella from the era. The wind decides it's had enough of her fancy fashion and yanks the parasol right out of her hands. The metal-tipped end of this flying fashion statement then takes a direct route to Henry Taylor's eye, turning his stroll into an impromptu horror show. And this wasn't just a minor poke, oh no. The parasol went full medieval joust and punctured through his eye, piercing his brain like it was aiming for the bullseye in a twisted game of darts. Despite the medical team's heroic efforts to salvage him, Taylor's fate was sealed. The wound, now a festival of infection and decay, proved too much. A few days later, he succumbed to his parasol-induced misfortune. Talk about a tragic way to get an eye-opening experience. Execution by elephant, ancient India. In today's world, if you were convicted of a crime with a death sentence, you'd either be killed by firing squad, electrocution, or lethal injection. However, in ancient India, if you committed a crime and were sentenced to death, you'd be trampled to death by a 4,000-kilogram elephant. That's like stacking 10 tractors on top of your body. This execution by elephant was as normal as the execution by guillotine in France. You would literally be dragged out to the public square after the villagers must have taken turns to beat you blue and black. There, you would be thrown into the arena by the elephant, who was always well trained in his role as executioner. And all the big guy has to do is just walk up to you and start to stamp on you. If you wanted to get even more creative, the elephants would be trained to pick up the condemned with its trunk, throw you around, break your limbs in the process, and then finish the job with their feet. If you thought roller coasters were thrilling, imagine being thrown by an elephant. The twisted part about this method of execution was that it was often reserved for royalty or people of high status because elephants were really respected in India. After all, nothing says VIP treatment quite like being smashed by an animal the size of 5 horses. Death by wine. George Plantagenet. So let's say your friend was having a pool party, and even though you had no plans of entering the water, someone sneakily pushed you in and tried to submerge you. If this has ever happened to you, then you can remember your panic and multiply that by 100. This was precisely how George Plantagenet felt when faced with his demise. So, it's the 15th century in England, and George Plantagenet, who was Duke of Clarence at the time, had just been arrested for committing high treason. After getting tried in front of a court and found guilty, he was sentenced to death by his brother, King Edward IV, whom George had attempted to overthrow. The usual method of execution back then was beheading with an axe or sword, but the ever-sinister King Edward IV had other plans on how to unalive his brother. Instead of being led to the execution ground, George was taken into the wine cellar, which probably got him thinking they wanted to give him his last drink. Well, technically, yes. He watched as the guards pried open a barrel of wine, but instead of handing him a cup of wine, the guards seized George and submerged his entire upper body into the barrel of wine. After struggling for a few minutes, he eventually died from drowning in a barrel of wine. This guy literally took drowning your sorrows to a whole new level. Death by self-inflicted gunshot. If you think your job is killing you, then maybe you should think about Clement Vallandigham, a 19th century American lawyer and politician who quite literally died on the job. So it all started in 1871 when Clement Vallandigham was defending a man accused of murder. The prosecution claims it was a clear-cut case of homicide, but Clement had a different theory. He's convinced the victim accidentally shot himself while drawing his pistol from his pocket. Now, most lawyers would be content with a verbal explanation of a nice diagram, but not Clement. He decided the best way to prove his point was to give a live demonstration. So there's Clement in the courtroom with a loaded gun similar to the one used in the homicide, and he's got an abundance of confidence, and he probably thought that nothing could go wrong. Well, everything, as it turns out, went horribly wrong because Clement accidentally shot himself right in the chest while demonstrating how the victim could have accidentally shot himself. Well, that was definitely a very enlightening case, and at least he proves his point. The only good thing to come out of this was that his client was acquitted based on the theory that Clement had so fatally demonstrated. So, Clement Vallandigham goes down in history as the lawyer who literally killed himself to win a case. Death by DIY parachute. Franz Reichelt. Okay, let's say you come up with this brilliant idea on how to solve world hunger or reduce global warming. It's normal to feel enthusiastic while waiting to try it out. And this is exactly what Franz Reichelt felt in 1912 when he first came up with the idea of a wearable parachute. Unfortunately, he plummeted from the new heights he thought he would achieve. You see, Franz was a professional tailor, and one day at work, he had the ultimate aha moment. He came up with the idea to invent a wearable parachute suit. Now, while most inventors would start by doing small experiments, like maybe wrapping a dummy in the parachute and dropping them from the second-story window, Mr. Franz here decided to literally grab the bull by the horns. This guy heads to the freaking Eiffel Tower, strapped himself into his newly invented contraption, and prepares to dive. It was either you go big or go home. And unfortunately for Franz, he did both in rapid succession. There's a crowd gathered, there are cameras rolling, and the police are there, probably thinking they're about to witness history. And they were right, just not in the way anyone hoped. Franz climbed onto the railing, and as the crowd cheers him on, he jumps. For a brief, glorious moment, Franz Reichelt was flying. And then, well, let's just say gravity remembers it has a job to do. The suit, unsurprisingly, does not work, and Franz plummeted 187 feet, leaving a crater in the ground and a valuable lesson in product testing for future generations. Death by kindness. Draco. When celebrating your birthday or a significant milestone in your life, it's normal for your family and friends to shower you with gifts and lots of love because it's your special day. Well, Draco was also showered with gifts after writing the first ever code of law in ancient Greece. However, the kindness was so much that he suffocated under it. So, around 620 BCE, Draco had just finished laying down some excessively harsh and severe laws for the people of Athens. According to this law, you'd be sentenced to death if you stole or owed someone money. These laws were later known as draconian laws. He's the Judge Judy of ancient Greece if Judge Judy sentenced everyone to death. Now, you'd think that with harsh laws, the people would sharpen their knives for him. Well, no. They loved Draco's laws so much that they decided to show their appreciation in the most Athenian way possible by showering him with gifts. So there's Draco, probably feeling pretty good about himself, proudly walking into the theater, and the crowd goes wild. But instead of throwing roses, they start hurling their clothes and hats at him. It's like the world's deadliest fashion show. However, things start to take a turn, the cloaks and hats pile up, and the poor lawmaker is soon trapped under a mountain of ancient Athenian swag. He couldn't crawl out due to the heavy weight of the clothes, and he ended up suffocating under all that appreciation. It's like the universe decided to teach him a lesson about excessive punishments by excessively punishing him with kindness. So, Draco goes down in history not just for his draconian laws, but for quite possibly being the only person ever loved to death in the most literal sense. There are so many more interesting, absurd stories like this, and the best way to quickly access them is to join our Discord server today. Death by Tortoise, Aeschylus, Greece, 455 BC. So picture this. In ancient Greece, where drama was a high art and tragedy reigned supreme, one of history's greatest playwrights, Aeschylus, was about to star in a real-life drama that even he couldn't have scripted. And the plot twist was a tortoise with an eagle's bad aim. Aeschylus, the man credited with turning tragedy into an art form, was taking a thoughtful stroll one afternoon in 455 BC. He was probably contemplating the intricacies of fate and fortune, utterly unaware that his day was about to become an epic saga worthy of one of his own plays. Meanwhile, up above, an eagle was on a mission to find a rock to crack open a tortoise's shell for a snack. But instead of locating a rock, the eagle spotted Aeschylus's bald head, mistaking it for the perfect impact surface. The eagle, probably feeling quite proud of its aerial targeting skills, dropped the tortoise from a great height. With precision that would make a circus acrobat jealous, the eagle let go of the tortoise, and down it came. The tortoise, usually just a slow-moving bundle of hard shell and mild mannerisms, transformed into a deadly projectile. It made a beeline for Aeschylus's head, turning his bald spot into the world's most unfortunate target. The impact was as dramatic as a tragic climax in one of his plays, but this time, the final curtain fell on Aeschylus for real. The tortoise's shell, which normally offered its protection, had become a fatal weapon, delivering a crushing blow that ended his life instantly.